Hey, it's Tuesday, which means it's time for another crime dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases, so that's what I talk about. If you like true crime and you want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should totally like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every Tuesday where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old face. How are we doing out there? I hope this month is treating you well. Just super real quick before we get into today's case. So I have been just like balls deep in research. I am like probably researching 4 or 5 cases right now because I have lots of stuff I want to do next year. And I'm a planner, okay? I'm a planner. So I've been, doing a lot of stuff. And as such, I haven't been, keeping an eye on like comments or anything. I'm getting to them. I promise. I'm so sorry. I've just been so like just distracted with research. But I noticed that we're over 500 subscribers, which I just wanted to take a quick second and just say, first of all, wow, like that's pretty wild to me. I just started this channel this year, just for fun and to, like broaden my skills and kind of make myself sort of push myself outside of my boundaries. And I never in a million years would have guessed that I would have like, 1 subscriber, let alone like over 500. So I just wanted to take a quick second and say thank you so much. Thank you for liking, subscribing. Thank you for commenting. I promise I will get to them. I'm so sorry. But thank you so much for commenting, guys. I love when you guys comment on my videos. I love when you suggest me cases. I love when y'all tell me what you think of these cases. I love it. So thank you so much. All right. Well, like I just said, I love when you guys, throw cases my way. And today is another case suggestion. And funnily enough, this case suggestion came from Heather Petty, who also recommended the Shanda Scherer case to me. So thank you again, Heather, for throwing today's case at me because, wow, it is, it's a pretty wild one today. Today, we are talking about Jimmie Sue Finger. Have you all heard of this case? Like, oh my god, like it's pretty bizarre. There are parts of it that straight up sound like it's from a movie, like a movie plot or something, like you were pitching a movie script to someone. It's pretty wild. I mean, it's so wild that it actually was made into, I think, made-for-TV movie, which we'll get all into. And thank you again, Heather, for throwing this one my way because, wow, I did a lot of deep research and, okay, I swear, I did so much research on this case trying to really dig deep. But man, there are just still big gaps in this case, such as, Jimmie Sue's actual background and upbringing and childhood. There's a few holes, but did find some stuff. And that is what I will be sharing with you today. Disclaimer wise, the subject of today, is Jimmie Sue. She's a 30-something-year-old woman who engaged in an affair with a teenager. So that's the subject matter. Nothing too gruesome today, but just sort of general disclaimer. That is what today's case kind of is about. All right, and I think that's it. I think we can just go ahead and dive right into it. All right, so we're gonna start with Jimmie Sue, and I actually don't have a lot about her background. All right, I don't even have her parents' names. I have very little details, but I will share with you what I did find out. So we know Jimmie Sue Finger. She was born Jimmie Sue Devotee on June 14th, 1950. Now, again, I do not know her parents' names. Don't know what they did. I know that she has 2 siblings. A sister named Lynn, who would later go by Lynn Forrester, and a brother named Larry. And that is about the extent of I know about her upbringing. So I ran into a couple of comments online from people who grew up with her, and that's really all I have to go on any type of clue on what her upbringing or childhood was like. I saw a comment from a woman named Donna who said that she was a childhood friend of Jimmie and grew up with her, or Twiggy, as she said her and her friends called her. Donna said she and Jimmie Sue would meet up on the street corner, and they would meet up there whenever they were going to go to work together, hang out, whether that was just going to Jimmie Sue's apartment or going shopping at the local 5 and Dime store. She said that her and Jimmie Sue would sit out on the fire escape of their apartment building, and they would often sit up there at night, and at sunset looking out over the city. Not even sure what city Jimmie grew up or was born in, not sure. sure. And yeah, that's about the extent of I know about Jimmie Sue's upbringing or childhood. It's so weird. I'm not sure why there wasn't a book written about this case, because yeah, we'll get into it. It's certainly interesting, to say the very least. So, not sure where, Jimmie Sue went to high school or anything. Just know that she eventually married a man named Terry Finger. And her and Terry would end up having 3 children. And I believe they married and had children very, very young. So the couple would end up having 2 daughters. One named Angela R. and one named T. Michelle. Other sources just referred to her as Michelle. And they had a son named David. Not sure, the oldest, the youngest, or anything like that. That's all I know. Like I said, background information on Jimmie is surprisingly very limited. I know at some point the family lived in Taunton, Massachusetts, and I think Terry either might have been in the military or at least worked for them in some capacity, or at the very least worked at the Army National Guard Armory, because I saw friends again online comment and say that they knew Jimmie and Terry around this time, and they all said that Terry was always gone to work on base while they hung out with Jimmie Sue and their children in the apartment. And I do know that while they're in Massachusetts, Jimmie Sue did work at Rennie Curtain Factory, but I'm not sure doing what. And then eventually the Finger family relocated to Kennesaw, Georgia, and not sure what year they got there or anything, but they went to Kennesaw, Georgia, and that is where the events of today's case take place. So in Georgia, Terry ended up starting and owning a company with Jimmie's brother Larry, and it was a construction company called Devotee and Fingers Construction Company. And this was a masonry company that they were able to run out of their homes. And again, not a lot of details about that. I don't know when they started it, how long they've been working together, or anything like that. Just when they're in Georgia at the time of the events of today's case, this is what Terry's job is. Jimmie Sue, she was a beautician and she owned her own business. She owned her own hair salon called Hair It Is. And then it also said she owned a ceramics shop. I was confused if this was because it said hair salon and ceramics shop. So I don't know if they meant it was a hair salon and a ceramics shop, or if they meant she owned a hair salon and a ceramic shop. Not sure. Noticed Jimmie's hair salon, Hair It Is, was actually quite a local hangout for the local teenage high school boys. Yeah, a little weird, right? And these high school boys, they all had a crush on Jimmie. Yes, it was like an 80s teen movie come to life. So Jimmie, she was only in her mid-30s, remember guys, and she already had kids in high school. I know at least her daughter Angela was in high school. Unclear about the other 2. Like I said, information's kind of scarce, but, you can do a little bit of math and, she, had her kids very, very young. So yeah, she's in her mid-30s. So she certainly looked, younger than, most other mothers, but she also was, sort of immature, I guess, could be the word used to describe her. I would say her maturity and emotional level was probably, similar to that of her high school daughter. Now, to said Jimmie and all the other beauticians at her shop, they always talked about the boys who came in sexual terms. It was always, a topic of discussion, sort of ogling them and, sort of kind of detailed girl talk, oh yeah, I would do him, and yeah, isn't he so hot? Kind of like that. One husband, David Gilroy, his ex-wife, worked at the salon, and he said, quote, "The main topic when I was in there revolved around sex, money, and young men." So see what I mean when I say that Jimmie's sort of kind of closer to her high school daughter in terms of maturity. You know what I mean? It's things like this, all right? Yeah, apparently, Jimmie and the other beauticians would, just gossip about all of the young underage teenage boys that were hanging out. Now, Jimmie, remember, like I said, she's, rather young for, the moms usually in her age group, right? Usually moms who have high school age children, right? They're somewhere in their 40s or so, right? Or if not older. But Jimmie, she prided herself on her appearance. She loved that she looked younger. And, she definitely dressed more similar to, again, her high school daughters than other women in her peer group. She took great pride and care in her appearance, always having her hair styled. I mean, obviously, she's a hairstylist. Always having, her nails done. And, always dressing, like I said, similar to her high school daughter. And it wasn't just her appearance. Jimmie was also just, a fun, charismatic, magnetic person. She had so much charisma and charm that people couldn't help but like her, including these teenage boys. You know, like all of this worked in Jimmie's favor. And yeah, it was no wonder that most of the high school boys, Jimmie was the MILF of discussion, you know? And Jimmie relished this attention. Like, she knew these high school boys, you know, had a thing for her, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of obvious when a teenage boy has a crush, right? And she relished this attention, you know? She relished it. She would always, you know, do that typical cringe joke that her and her daughters were always mistaken for sisters rather than mother and daughter. Yeah. Cringe. But yeah, she relished this attention. She loved it, and she really played into it, you know? Like I said, she consciously made these decisions in her appearance and wardrobe to, you know, come off this way. Now, Jimmie was said to also be a really wonderful mother. It is said that she had a very close relationship. I know at least with her daughter Angela, that those, from what I could read in articles regarding the relationship with her children, it really focused on her relationship with Angela, her high school daughter. So, not sure about her other children, but I know at least with Angela, they shared a very close bond. In fact, yeah, the relationship was almost more like a friendship than a mother and daughter relationship, you know? Like, they'd go to the mall together and shopping together, go to the movies together, and yeah, just pal out with her daughter. Angela attended North Cobb High School, and I know at some point, I think she was either a sophomore or a junior, not sure. But at some point, when she's at school, she develops a crush on a fellow classmate. This classmate was a senior, and his name was Michael Kettman Jr. Now, who is this senior that Angela's a crush on? Well, let's get into him, because he is a major player in today's case. So, Michael Carl Kettman Jr., he had a happy, average upbringing in Kennesaw, Georgia. That's where he was born and raised. His parents were Michael Sr. and Blanche Kettman, and he had 3 sisters. I know one was named Diana, another Roxanne, and I'm not sure about the other sister's name. Michael had a very close relationship with his parents, especially his mother. It is said that he confided in her, like, with just everything. They had a very close relationship. And at this time, when Angela develops her crush, Michael is 17. Like I said, he's a senior at the same high school. You know, getting ready to graduate, and yeah, just had his whole life ahead of him, you know? He worked part-time at the local grocery store, saving up money for college. I read that he wanted to major in science. Not sure specifically what, but something in the STEM field. He was an Eagle Scout, and he played offensive tackle on the North Cobb High School football team in the 1984-85 season. He was also a customer at Here It Is. Now, there were girls like Angela who, you know, had their eyes on Michael. He was quite a little handsome lad, but it is said that, you know, he was in that awkward teenage phase. So, you know, he was still kind of shy around the opposite sex. Didn't quite know how to act around them. You know, Blanche had raised her son to, you know, be polite and have manners. But seems that Michael was, still in that socially awkward phase where, he was still kind of socially anxious around girls. So one day in 1984, after talking to Michael for a few months, Angela invited him to a party that she was having at her house. She was planning on trying to get closer to Michael, and a party is like the perfect opportunity for that, right? Now, though Michael wasn't really the partying type, he didn't drink or do drugs, you know, like some of his friends did. He decided that, he would go to Angela's party. That'd be a good way to, be sociable, you know, his friends would be there. So it's not like he wouldn't know anyone, you know, and it wouldn't be awkward. Now, I actually read some sources that said Michael and Angela actually dated and were dating, and this party was actually a, birthday party that Angela was throwing for him. So not sure why there are conflicting reports about that little fact, but some sources said that she just had a crush on him and invited him to her party, and other sources said that they were actually dating. So the day of the party comes, and, you know, it goes off without a hitch, and things are going all right, when all of a sudden, right, you know, Michael's hanging out at the party, having a good time, when all of a sudden, he looks over, and this beautiful, gorgeous girl catches his eye. Just FYI, sorry guys, there might be some noise in the background. I hate living on the street that I live in, and I live next to some of the most rude, loud neighbors. So sorry if you hear some music in the background. I don't know why they decide to crank up their music and party at 2 p.m, but whatever. So sorry, can't stop. I'm in the middle of my recording. I can't stop now. So anyway, they're at the party, and Michael's sitting there having a good time when he looks over and sees a girl who catches his attention. She was dancing in a very, sexy, suggestive festive manner, I think with like other boys at the party, you know, so she was kind of, you know, not a wallflower, you know, so she was dancing over there. And yeah, Michael is just, he's struck. All right, he's struck. He's like, oh my God, who is that? You know? So Michael asked Angela, you know, in a tone that was obvious, he was very smitten. All right, like it was pretty obvious. And he asked her, like, oh my God, who's that girl? Like, who is she? Where's she from? Like, I don't recognize her from school. Like, she's, you know, wow. And Angela, you know, who's visibly shocked and I'm sure just completely heartbroken. Like, you know how it was at that age. Oh, it's hard enough, right? Informed Michael that was not some high school girl from another school. It wasn't even one of their peers. That was her 34-year-old mother, Jimmie. She just looked young for her age, and Michael was floored. He was shocked. He thought for sure Jimmie was a peer of theirs, a high school girl. You know, at first it seemed that, you know, Michael was just going to be another faraway admirer of Jimmie's, right? But remember, Kennesaw is not a big place, all right? It's a very small town, and Michael worked at a very, very popular grocery store. So, of course, it wasn't uncommon for him to run into Jimmie and vice versa. Now, apparently, when she would come into the store and they would interact, it was like pretty obvious that, you know, Michael was smitten with her. Like, come on, he's a 17-year-old boy. She's a 34-year-old woman. Like, once you're that age, I mean, you kind of, right? Like, it's pretty obvious when a teenager has a crush. Whenever Jimmie Sue would come into the store, Michael would stop whatever it was that he was doing and follow her around, even carrying out her groceries. And yeah, it was very obvious that he was like a lovesick puppy following her around. It was very obvious that, you know, he was trying to flirt. And Jimmie, as we know, she loves this attention from young boys. She loves it, and she really ate this up and encouraged it. Michael just found Jimmie just irresistible. She just had this like zest for life. I already told you, Jimmie Sue is just, she's one of those people that just has that charisma, man, that just people like her. You know those people? Like, you know what I'm talking about? That is how Jimmie was described. So, of course, Michael, who's already smitten with her, yeah, and she already has this natural charisma and charm that draws people in. He was smitten, man. He was smitten. He just couldn't believe, you know, that, like, Jimmie was a, quote, grown-up, you know, with her own family. And it wasn't long before 17-year-old Michael, who's a teenager, and 34-year-old Jimmie engaged in an affair. Yeah, wasn't long at all. Actually started in December of 1984. Some sources claim that Michael was still 16 when they started up. I don't know. But we know for sure that he was underage. And we know this affair would last until at least January of 1986. Now, it wasn't long before rumors of the affair circulated around this town. I said earlier, Kennesaw was a small town. Yeah, it was like a population of 5,000 at this time. And it wasn't long before rumor circulated in certain parts of town that, yeah, a high school student was having an affair with his classmate's mother. And as we know, yeah, the rumors were in fact true. Yeah, they were sleeping together. So they're engaged in this affair, and it is said that, yeah, the two would meet up in secret spots and have sex. Michael was having his first sexual experience. You know, this was like his first real love, and it's a shame that it was to a predator. Yeah, it just so many things wrong. Michael even kept track of the days and times that him and Jimmie Sue would have sex. He had a calendar that he would mark. Yeah, because he's 17, dude. He's a kid. Jimmie was reveling in this affair because I just said she was unhappy in her marriage at this point. And yeah, she loved that, you know, she was able to attract this like young teenage boy, you know. She was very much the cliche. It is said that Jimmie felt that, like, Michael was a way to escape her unhappy, terrible marriage, and it was a way to humiliate her husband, you know, especially because, you know, this is like a young, virile kid. Now, like I said, though there were, you know, rumors circulating about the relationship, I don't know if these were just, yeah, in, like, high school social circles or what, because neighbors of the Finger family had no idea that this was going on. They said that the family was quiet, kept to themselves, and yeah, they had no idea that Jimmie and Michael were engaged in an affair. Meanwhile, Blanche, you know, Michael's mother, she was completely in the dark of what was going on with her son. She was pretty naive. I guess there were some reports that said that she did hear about the rumors circulating that there was like a high school student seeing like a classmate's mother, but, you know, she certainly didn't think it had anything to do with, you know, her family or her son, and she didn't really think too much of it. And I guess it wasn't until two of her daughters confirmed it for Blanche that she found out. Yeah, they were like, yeah, Mom, those rumors going around, found, yeah, that's about Mike. One of them said, quote, "Mom, do you know that Michael's having an affair with Angela's mother?" Now, I'm not exactly sure when Blanche found out about this affair. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how long it had been going on, but yeah, when Blanche found out, she did confront her son. And yeah, he admitted it. And yeah, it caused a rare, tense argument and fight between mother and son, which, yeah, like I just said, was rare. They did not fight. Michael, of course, was saying that he was in love with Jimmie, and of course Blanche is just like, what? She's like, you know, she's in her 30s. What are you talking about? And yeah, it was not a good time in the Ketman residence at this time. And soon they were arguing all the time, and it was always about Michael's relationship with Jimmie. And Blanche, she could see changes in her son, and she did not like what she was seeing. Whereas before, Michael was very open and confided in his mother and in his family about things. Ever since he had started sleeping with Jimmie, he became much more secretive, withdrawn, and just kind of moody. And yeah, over the next several, I don't know if it was months, but a terrible pattern would emerge, all right? Where Blanche and Michael Sr., you know, Michael's father, and Michael would all argue. His parents would demand that he end this affair and break it off, that it wasn't right. And Michael would, you know, stay adamant and say no, that he loved her and they belonged together. And, you know, the typical stuff that you would expect a teenager experiencing their first love and their, you know, kind of first real relationship, which I know, I'm not saying that this is like an actual relationship. It's predatory, but you know what I mean. And yeah, just saying he loved her and they were going to be together and they had to deal with it. And yeah, it just caused a lot of tension in the Ketman residence. It got to a point where Michael would say that he broke things off with Jimmie so he could just, you know, stop the arguing and stuff. But then Blanche or his father would be out and about on town and they would see the two of them together. I already just said this was a small town. Like, they weren't exactly being like totally discreet, you know what I mean? Michael's parents even stooped to straight up bribery to get their son to break things off with Jimmie. They bought him a blue Camaro and was like, all right, here's like a car, and yeah, this is for you. You got your life to live, you know, you're gonna graduate soon, and yeah, here's a car, break things off with Jimmie, and yeah, it's yours. And once again, Michael lied. He said that he did break things off with Jimmie, but then, not long afterwards, Blanche saw him driving around town in the Camaro with Jimmie. And yeah, meanwhile, the affair between Jimmie and Michael was really heating up. They were having a lot of sex. But Jimmie, she also confided in her teenage lover. She confided in Michael. And she told him all about her unhappy, abusive marriage. She often came crying into Michael's arms saying that Terry was being abusive towards her and their children. And she also told him that Terry had sexually abused Angela. Now, apparently, Terry did confess to sexually abusing Angela, and I guess there are other family members who do back up Jimmie's claim of a sexual and physical abusive relationship with Terry. The consensus seems to be that Terry, yeah, is kind of a giant D-bag. In fact, during the affair, the early part of 1985, Jimmie actually filed for divorce from Terry, and Terry actually moved out of the home during this time. However, only several months later, I think only like 3 or 4 months later, Terry had moved back in and Jimmie had withdrawn her court request or her court filing for divorce. Now, I believe it's at this time, when Terry has moved back in, that he discovers the affair that Jimmie is having. I do not think he knew prior to this. I also read some sources that said when Terry moved back in at this time, that is when Jimmie began crying to Michael about like the abusive relationship and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of weird. Like I said, there's some information about this case that I'm just like, I don't understand, like, why there's not, like, a straight, clear-cut answer, but, yeah. Now, of course, when, you know, Jimmie is telling him all this, Michael's horrified. He's horrified. Like, oh my God, like, leave him. Oh my God, like, leave him. What are you talking about? Don't stay there. And he was like, why don't, let's go run away together. I'll take care of you, you know? Like, Michael was all in for Jimmie, all right? He was ride or die for her, and he was ready to, you know, run off it and marry her, you know? But Jimmie said that she couldn't, all right? She couldn't leave Terry. She couldn't divorce him because he would make her life a living hell. He would take her business. He would prevent her from seeing her children, which I'm not sure how. Like, if she could get family members to testify that he was physically and sexually abusive, I don't understand how that works, but whatever. That's what she told Michael. So yeah, divorce wasn't an option. And it wasn't long. It wasn't long at all before Jimmie, she started prodding Michael. She just kind of started prodding him to see and test just how far he was willing to go for her. She started wondering aloud and pondering like, what could they do to get rid of Terry? What could they possibly do to rid their lives of Terry? And what could they do to get rid of him once and for all, Like she started by this, right? Just sort of like talking and pondering aloud. Now, it is theorized and it is alleged that Jimmie wanted Terry dead so that she could collect on some life insurance policies. Not to mention she'd be able to keep the house. She'd be ridding herself of the pedophile. And yeah, it was just all upside if Terry just died. So through this prodding and also through sex, Jimmie slowly and methodically started manipulating Michael. She would tell him things, on top of, the stuff like pondering aloud, like, what could we do that would rid us of Terry once and for all? She would also, feed Michael's ego. Like, on top of, like, sex, she would tell him stuff like, oh, quote, I've never wanted any man as much as I've wanted you. And, because Michael is young, this is his first sexual experience, on top of being, like, his first relationship ever, she was able to manipulate him. And this was working like a charm, guys. Like, Michael was becoming obsessed with Jimmie. It was all he could think about was Jimmie, being with her and feeling her, and she just consumed his thoughts. I mean, we've all been in those relationships, right? Especially like your first real one, right? Where you're just so overloaded with emotions. But on top of this, on this situation, right, we've got a predatory relationship. We've got a manipulator who's significantly older, and yeah, it's a mixture for just all kinds of bad. As Michael's obsessed with Jimmie and he starts, wanting to be with her forever, he also starts, wondering and pondering, like, how can he get rid of Terry? And soon he became obsessed with that thought, obsessed with getting rid of Terry so he could run off and be with Jimmie. And it seemed like the only thing standing in their way of them being together, was Terry. According to friends of Michael, he was telling them what Jimmie Sue was telling him, that Terry was abusive, was molesting and sexually abusing Angela, and he was determined to rescue her, all right? He was telling his friends this stuff. According to them, Michael, truly believed that he was in love with Jimmie. He truly believed that they belonged together. He would ask Jimmie, quote, do you want him dead? And she would answer yes. And Michael told her not to worry. He would take care of it. Meanwhile, things back at the Ketman residence, they were still tense. Things had not changed. So Blanche, knowing that she wasn't going to reach her son, she was like, you know what? I guess I'll try reasoning with Jimmie. Maybe I can get her to see reason. She phoned Jimmie, warning her to stay away from her son. And as you can imagine, his conversation did not go well, was not friendly nor polite. Blanche claims that Jimmie told her, quote, if you make trouble for me, honey, I'll drive nails in your son's coffin. Now, Jimmie denies saying this. In fact, she denies that this phone conversation even took place. But Blanche is adamant that it did. I guess there was a time where Blanche tried to confront Jimmie in person. They somehow arranged a meetup at a cafe. That didn't go well either. And it is said that Jimmie had stormed out before the drinks had even gotten to the table. And meanwhile, Jimmie and Michael were busy hatching their plans on how to get rid of Terry. Now, according to Michael, he said it was Jimmie Sue that suggested they hire a hitman to do the job. According to a co-worker of Michael's, whose name was Michael Moore, he said that Michael told him that he, quote, wanted to have his girlfriend's husband knocked off. He said she was willing to pay, the guy's wife. He told me she was willing to pay $2,000 to get the insurance. Another man, I mentioned him earlier, David Gilreath, remember one of his ex-wife worked at Here It Is. He said that when he was in the salon at the time, because he was married to his wife at the time, when he was in there, he was waiting for his wife to get off. Jimmie, I guess, was openly talking about, like, trying to find someone to, quote, bump her husband off so she could collect his life insurance. And this was towards the end of 1985. David said that Jimmie had even asked him if he had known someone. Now, Jimmie and Michael would twice try to hire a hitman to get rid of Terry. And twice, these plans would fail. So in late 1985, Michael told one of his teachers, a woman named Bonnie French, that yes, him and Jimmie Sue were having an affair, and that he actually paid a man $100 to kill Terry. But yeah, nothing came of the attempt. I don't know if the guy, just took the money and ran or what. I don't know. It was said after this first first failed attempt that Jimmie started showing an ugly side to Michael. She, called him names and really chastised him for failing. The second attempt, I guess, occurred in late July 1985. So not sure when that first attempt was. We just know that Michael told his teacher about it in late 1985. But we do know the second failed assassination attempt happened in July of that same year, 1985. Jimmie Sue had evidently given Michael $1,800 cash to hire someone. And Michael, probably because he's still a young kid, gave the would-be assassin all of the cash up front. And I'm guessing, like what happened with the first hitman, yeah, this guy just took off. Just took off with the money, and yeah, Terry was not killed. Now, to say after this attempt, Jimmie was livid. She was super pissed. She called Michael a, quote, liar, a wimp, and a thief. And she just really, really demeaned him, calling him names, chastising him, insulting his manhood, and all that. She really let him have it. She said he was incapable of doing anything right, and yeah, she had just had it with him. And as a result, Jimmie started withholding sex from Michael, further using it to control and manipulate him. She threatened to break things off entirely if Terry wasn't dead by August 1st of that year. And Michael, of course, because he's just under her spell, begged Jimmie to give him another chance. Begged him, and she was like, all right. And so, yeah, they talked about how else they could get rid of Terry. This time involving Michael doing it himself. I'm not sure exactly what led to the discussion, but Michael at some point said that he could shoot Terry, but he would need a long-range weapon, like a long-range rifle, to get the job done. It would also need to have a scope. It just so happened that Terry had a long-distance range rifle with a scope that he could use. Jimmie told Michael about this, and so she took it and placed it in the back of her van. And she then told Michael where he could get it. Now, I don't know what happened. I know that this attempt failed as well. Not sure what happened. I have no idea. No details. We just know that this attempt also failed. After this failed attempt, Michael then suggested, well, let's attach a bomb to his truck. Let's blow him up. Let's try that. And so that was the other plan that they hatched. So on the day they attempted this, August 30th, again, we're in 1985, Jimmie made a very big, lavish breakfast, and this delayed Terry getting out of the house. I don't know if he carpooled or something. I don't know. But yeah, that was the plan, was for Jimmie to delay Terry leaving the house that morning. And I'm not sure when, but I know, Michael attached an amateur homemade bomb to the underside of his truck. So Terry left the house, and as he was driving, he heard, quote, something under his truck around 8:05 a.m. as he was driving. He said he pulled the truck over, and he saw that there might have been some minor damage on the undercarriage of his truck, but since it kept moving and, there was no smoke or anything like that, he was like, all right, I'm going to continue on to my destination, and I'll take a closer look at this when I get there, because he was on his way to work. So when he got to work, it was a construction site in Doraville, he, got out and examined his truck more closely. And it was when he examined it that he found the remains of the bomb, and he called the police. When they got there, they searched the undercarriage of his truck and, took the remains of the amateur homemade bomb. The bomb had actually been attached to Terry's gas tank, but when it exploded, it wasn't enough to rupture the gas tank, which I guess is why he was able to just continue on to work. Now, after this failed attempt, Jimmie had it. Jimmie had it. She was so angry and fed up with Michael and his failed attempts. Remember, Terry was supposed to be dead by August 1st, and here we are at the end of August, and he was still alive. She again went off on Michael and insulted him, and it ended with her saying that she wanted nothing more to do with him. She was done. Now, after this, the affair was still ongoing, but it did lighten up considerably. Michael said that the two did still keep in contact via phone. I think they were also still sexually involved, just not nearly as heavy as before. Now, when they are on the phone, Jimmie Sue again began complaining to Michael that Terry was up to his old tricks again and he was abusing her. She told him that he was being rough with her and the children, and she didn't want to live with him anymore. She was done. So the new year rolls around, and January 1st, 1986, Jimmie and Michael have sex. And afterwards, as they're laying in bed, Jimmie Sue informs Michael that this would be the last time they would sleep together until Terry was dead. She was tired of waiting, and it was time to kill him. It was decided that Terry would just be straight up shot, and Michael said that he would do it, but he didn't have a weapon. So Jimmie allowed Michael to take her .38 caliber pistol. It was kept in the glove compartment of her van, and she told Michael where she kept it and that he could retrieve it from there. And a few days after he took it from her van, she reported it stolen/missing. Jimmie Sue then gave Michael a ruse of how to lure Terry out of the house. He said that he should get one of his friends, preferably a girl, to say that her car is broken down in front of their residence and that she needed Terry's help. And this would get Terry out of the house. Thus, Michael could get the job done. And that's exactly what Michael did. He enlisted the help of his 16-year-old friend, Elizabeth Reesey. She would later go by Elizabeth Rogers. So Michael told his friend Elizabeth about the affair, and he also told her that Terry was a pedophile who was sexually and physically abusing his family, and that they were going to go over and they were going to scare him. They were going to scare and intimidate him. And that was the plan. But he needed Elizabeth to lure Terry out of the house, and this is what he told his friend. And she was all in. So the plan would be to have Elizabeth knock on the Fingers' door and pretend to have car trouble. And then when Terry stepped out to help fix her, that is when Michael could emerge from the shadows and shoot him. And this was the plan that was set in motion. And finally, on February 22nd, 1986, they set their plan in motion. So earlier that day, Jimmie Sue called Michael, and she warned him that Terry was, quote, on a rampage against him. He was threatening to kill Michael because of the affair. And yeah, she had called Michael to warn him. That evening, Michael called his friend Elizabeth and told her that, yeah, the plan was gonna go down tonight. So around 9:30 p.m., Elizabeth drove her and Michael to a nearby McDonald's. And in the bathroom, Michael changed his clothing into like dark clothing. I read other sources that said that they met up at the McDonald's, but either way, they leave the McDonald's together. Michael instructed Elizabeth to drive to the high school, and on the way, they passed the Finger residence. At the school, Michael got out and took off Elizabeth's license plates. And when Elizabeth asked why he was doing this, he said that he didn't want anyone to get her plate number and trace it back to her or anything like that. He wanted to make sure her involvement was not known. Michael informed her that he had a gun, and again, the plan was just to intimidate Terry. And with the license plates taken off, they then headed back to the Finger residence. Elizabeth dropped Michael off about a block or two away from the house, and then she pulled up right outside the residence and parked on the street. She got out and went up to the door and knocked. Terry answered the door, and right on cue, Elizabeth said that she had car trouble and she needed a jump, and could he help her? Terry disappeared inside for a second, and he told Jimmie that he was going to go outside to help someone with their car. The couple had been laying in bed or laying on a couch or something watching TV when Elizabeth had knocked. Terry then reappeared at the door with his jumper cables, and he proceeded to walk out. So he's heading, outside his front door, across his front lawn, walking to Elizabeth's car, when Michael, dressed in black and holding the pistol, emerged from the shadows. He pointed it right at Terry, and Terry shouted, quote, "Please God, no, don't," before Michael fired 4 to 5 shots. He fired until the gun was empty, and every hit landed in Terry, who immediately collapsed to the ground. I read other reports that said that Terry was shot as he was walking back into the house after looking at Elizabeth's car. He had told her to start it, but of course, it wouldn't, because she had put it in neutral, so it wouldn't. And he was walking back to the house when Michael emerged and shot him. Michael then jumped in Elizabeth's car and told her to drive. I'm a little unclear on where Elizabeth was when Terry was shot, if she was in her car, standing outside it, or what. But yeah, Michael told her to drive, and she did. They took off. He told her to turn off her headlights, and they drove in the dark for several blocks. On the way, Michael told his friend that they had freed Jimmie Sue, and she would soon be coming into a lot of money. They drove to nearby Lake Allatoona, and there they pulled over. Now, at this point, Elizabeth, understandably, was freaking out. Remember, this was not the plan, and she was panicking. She told Michael, like, what was she gonna do? Jimmie saw her, and that was when, Jimmie told her, no, this was the plan all along. And not only was this the plan all along, Jimmie was in on it, all right? She knew, so Elizabeth had nothing to worry about. In fact, he told Elizabeth that Jimmie was the one who had given him the gun, and she had actually been the one to plan this whole thing. Michael threw the gun in the lake, put Elizabeth's plates back on her car, and then the pair drove back to the McDonald's. And again, Michael assuring his friend that they did the right thing, that they had freed Jimmie, and that Terry was a pedophile and he was abusive, and they had done a good thing. At the McDonald's, Michael changed back into his clothes, and then I think at this point, the two parted ways. But despite thinking that he was clever, it would not take long for Michael to be caught. In fact, the very next day, February 23rd, Michael was stopped around 6:35 p.m. by the police. They had received an anonymous call that they should look in Michael's direction for Terry's murder. The anonymous caller also told police that they should also look at Michael for the failed bombing of Terry's truck. A friend of Jimmie Sue's, named Bertie Llewellyn, she was well aware of the affair, and she also called the police and told them to look in Michael's direction. She told them that Michael had made threats against Terry's life. And acting on these two tips, officers had staked out the Kettman residence. They staked out the residence all day, and when Michael finally emerged from his home that evening, the police wanted to pull him over to, verify this is who, they say it was, and they wanted to talk to Michael about Terry's murder. So they found some excuse to pull Michael over, and when they did, they discovered that Michael did not have his license, and so on the spot they arrested him for that. Officer Ronald Bass, he told Michael that he was going to be arrested for driving without a license. He was going to take him down to Cobb County Jail. There, he would post bond, and then he'd be able to go home. But Officer Bass said that he also wanted to talk to Michael about the murder of Terry Finger. Michael said he would be more than happy to discuss the incident. Michael told police that he hated Terry and said, quote, "Whatever I get, I deserve." And all throughout his interrogation and all throughout everything, Michael would maintain that Jimmie had absolutely nothing to do with Terry's murder. It was all him. Michael was indicted for murder on April 17th, 1986, and his trial happened October 6th of that same year. Now, Michael's attorneys tried getting his initial statement to police, about hating Terry and getting what he deserved and stuff. They tried getting those statements thrown out. A Jackson Deno hearing was then held, and this is a court proceeding that is held to determine whether a defendant's statement was given to police voluntarily or not. At this hearing, it was determined that Michael had in fact voluntarily given over those incriminating statements to police, so his statement and confessions were fair play. His trial didn't last for very long, and on October 9th, 18-year-old Michael Kettman Jr., he was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Terry Finger. He began serving his time at Wayne County Jail, a juvenile detention center located in Jessup, Georgia. Now, though the killer had confessed and, the trial had been wrapped up and everything seemed to be over, everyone involved with the case, everyone, they all figured Jimmie had way more to do with her husband's murder than Michael was letting on. But remember, like I said, all throughout his interrogation, his trial, all throughout everything, Michael maintained that it was him and him alone who had planned and orchestrated Terry's murder. Jimmie Sue was completely innocent. Like I said, man, everyone involved with this case, guys, not just the investigators and prosecutors and all that. They weren't the only ones who were questioning Jimmie Sue's involvement. The jury in Michael's trial also questioned her involvement. I guess during their deliberations, the jury had actually sent a note to the judge asking when Jimmie Sue was going to be put on trial. And the judge had responded to them with, quote, "When Michael Kettman testifies to that." Michael tried getting a new trial. That request was denied in April of 1987. Another appeal that was filed right after was subsequently denied in November. And still, all throughout his time in prison, Michael maintained that Jimmie had nothing to do with Terry's murder. It was all him. He also maintained his love and devotion to Jimmie. Meanwhile, Jimmie herself was free and clear, out living her life, as Michael, at 18 years old, began serving his life sentence. Jimmie only visited Michael a few times in prison, no doubt, I'm sure, to maintain control. And she did write him, and it seemed like, for the moment, her vice grip around Michael was tight and solid. And as Michael was rotting away in prison, Jimmie, like I said, she was free and clear, so she was out living her life. She spent the $110,000 insurance money that she got from Terry's death. She moved to a new address, and eventually began dating someone else. else. She began dating a man named Ralph Lee Gambrill in 1987, and she would subsequently go on to marry Ralph in May of 1988. She then went by Jimmie Sue Gambrill. Now, Blanche, remember Michael's mother? She also knew that Jimmie had more to do with this. She knew that it wasn't just her son. But they had no way of proving it. With Michael maintaining 100% responsibility, there was no evidence to implicate Jimmie. However, Blanche, she decided to take things in her own hand. And y'all, when I tell you what she planned and what she subsequently did, you would think I was explaining the plot of a movie. So Blanche decided that in order to get to the truth, she was going to befriend Jimmie. She was going to befriend her. She was going to get close to her. And this was with the hopes that one day, with her guard down, Jimmie would let something slip. Or Blanche might find something to implicate Jimmie. But Blanche decided she was going to start this close relationship and friendship with Jimmie in the hopes of finding something, somehow, somewhere, someday, that would prove Jimmie's involvement in the murder of her husband. Yeah, she started a friendship with the woman who was responsible for her son being behind bars. Can you imagine? Isn't that wild? Would you be able to do that? Please tell me, especially if you're a mother. Would you be able to do this? It's just so wild to me. So wild. So yeah, being traumatized, seeing her only son locked up behind bars for life, Blanche began a friendship with Jimmie. Now, Michael, of course, was still under Jimmie's spell, and he told his parents that they were going to have to accept her. And so, through clenched teeth and fists, that's exactly what they did. Can you imagine? In fact, guys, Jimmie spent the holidays of 1987 with them. Yeah, with Michael's family. That just blows my mind. That's so wild. I don't know if I'd be able to do that, guys. I don't know. I don't think I'm mature enough. Oops, I meant she spent Christmas of 86. Yeah, the year of Michael's trial is what she spent with the Ketmans. Excuse me. Now, all throughout their friendship, Blanche, she could clearly see, who Jimmie was, She could see her for what she was. She could see how she manipulated and controlled people. She saw how she still had a hold over her son, even as he was locked away behind bars. And she saw that Jimmie didn't really care about her son. Jimmie would always make promises to visit him or something like that, but something would always happen, and those promises would be broken. The letters from Jimmie became less and less until she just stopped writing Michael altogether. And Blanche could see right there how Jimmie just went on living her life without a care in the world, without a care for Michael. However, get this. This is just so weird, alright? It's even weirder. So even though Blanche could clearly see that Jimmie was a manipulator, and she could see through Jimmie's actions that she didn't really care about Michael, but even still, because Jimmie just has that je ne sais quoi that some people have, that charismatic, magnetic personality that draws people in, Blanche found herself within that sphere. She found herself liking Jimmie. Yeah, isn't that wild? She found herself liking her, even feeling sorry for her. It was amazing. She couldn't help but like Jimmie. But remember, despite this, Blanche still loved her son, so she was still gonna go for Jimmie's throat and gonna try to get her, thrown behind bars if she could. But yeah, it was amazing. And she was conscious of it too. She was conscious of the fact of oh my God, I'm being drawn to her. I kind of like her. Just wild. It's just so wild. But even though she, pretended to try to have this relationship with Jimmie for the sake of her son and whatnot, at the same time, she was still trying to get Michael to see Jimmie for what she was. Trying to get him to see that, she didn't, Jimmie didn't really care about him. And slowly, over time, Michael, he slowly began to open his eyes. But honestly, I think this had less to do with what his mother told him and more to do with Jimmie's own actions. He was sitting in jail. He knew that the promises were being broken. He knew that Jimmie wasn't visiting him nearly as often as she said she was. She wasn't writing him nearly as often. And yeah, it wasn't long before, Michael couldn't help but feel abandoned by her. When Jimmie began dating Ralph in 1987, I think this was the nail in the coffin, and Michael was just heartbroken. Jimmie had moved on without him and found someone else. And I think knowing that she was dating someone, I think this kind of gave Michael the push to begin to think about opening up. And slowly, over time, he did. He finally began to see that he had been used and manipulated by Jimmie, and now she didn't even think about him. So, wanting to use this fact and finally wanting to be able to prosecute Jimmie Sue, Cobb County DA Thomas J. Sharon, he met with Michael behind bars in March of 1988. Like I said, investigators, the prosecutors, detectives, and all that, like, everyone knew that Jimmie had more to do with this. And yeah, they had been waiting for years to have something to get her with. So when Sharon met with Michael behind bars, a plan was formed. So Michael agreed to wear a wire, and Blanche would talk Jimmie into going to visit Michael. It would then be Michael's job to get Jimmie Sue to incriminate herself. Blanche was able to talk Jimmie into seeing Michael behind bars by telling her that Michael was, he was starting to grow a little restless and weary behind bars, and he was thinking about talking. And this, of course, worked like a charm, and Jimmie made plans to go see Michael. Now, remember when I said that Blanche was sort of, like, becoming drawn to Jimmie and, like, liking her and stuff? Well, get this. So, the night before the first visit Jimmie was going to make to Michael, Blanche was getting cold feet. She was getting cold feet. Yeah, can you believe that? She was hysterical and anxious, wondering if she was in fact doing the right thing. Like, she liked Jimmie, and she was wondering if this was wrong. Yeah, can you believe that? After all of this, with her son behind bars, after what this woman did to her son, she was sitting there wondering, like, oh, I don't know, is this fair to Jimmie? Like, isn't that wild? That's the kind of, like, charismatic, magnetic person Jimmie is, man. Like, this is wild. She called Sharon, who talked her down, and by the next morning, the plan was back on track, and Blanche was fine. So, Jimmie would end up going to Michael twice behind bars, and of course, both those times, unknowingly to her, she was being recorded because Michael was wearing a wire, and Sharon was actually monitoring their discussion in real time. She visited him once on April 30th, 1988, and again on July 30th of that same year. Now, during these two visits, Michael asked certain questions about the night he murdered Terry, and in the way she answered and what she said, authorities thought they had a pretty clear picture of what happened. She said, quote, "I remember enough to eat me up inside. You know that, but I don't want to remember it. I let you down. I am as much responsible for what happened as you are." She also admitted in these conversations that the relationship between them was wrong and predatory, saying, quote, "My biggest guilt issue is that you're in here because I put added pressures on you, and I was older. I should have known better." Yeah, you think there are parts where she admits to helping plan the ruse that led Terry out of the house. She said that she remembered telling Michael to have Elizabeth say that she was a friend of Angela's when she came to the front door. Quote, "We agreed for her to say she had car trouble. I remember parts of it, enough to know that I am partly responsible for what happened. I remember enough to know that." She also admits to giving Michael the gun in these conversations. She also said that she didn't believe that Michael would really go through with it, and she didn't recall encouraging him to do so. She brought up the failed bombing attempt, saying that she would be in big trouble if the district attorney found out her involvement. She also admits throughout these conversations that Michael had gotten that long-range rifle with the scope out of the back of her van. She also revealed that she had about $65,000 left of the insurance money. This was after paying off some bills, buying a mobile home for one of her daughters, and a car for the other. She promised to buy, quote, "an all-new wardrobe for Michael as soon as he got out of bars." Yeah. So this was the stuff that was revealed during Jimmie's two visits with Michael. And remember, they were all recorded. Everything that they said. And apparently what Jimmie revealed in those conversations was enough for them to get her a warrant, because on August 11th, 1988, so less than 2 weeks since her second visit with Michael, she was arrested at her home. And that same day, a grand jury indicted her on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. Yeah, needless to say, Jimmie was quite shocked at all of this. She maintained her innocence and was released on a $230,000 bond. Her husband Ralph stood by her, saying, quote, "You've got an innocent woman behind bars who's scared to death, and she didn't do anything." Jimmie told police that her affair with Michael only lasted 3 months, and it actually ended a year before Terry's murder. She claimed that though she felt guilty about the affair with Michael, she had absolutely no knowledge of what was going to happen that night, and she was completely innocent. Her attorneys attempted to get those recorded prison tapes thrown out, but Judge ruled that they were in fact admissible. At her trial, 6 of Jimmie Sue's relatives, including her children and parents, testified in her defense, while of course Blanche and Michael testified for the prosecution. Jimmie's trial began March 27th, 1989, and it would last for 6 days. Also, the jury consisted of all men. The defense had objected and dismissed every potential female juror. The prosecution, led by Sharon of course, painted Jimmie Sue as a, quote, sad, pathetic woman, and accused her of orchestrating, manipulating, and blackmailing Michael into killing her husband. Jimmie's defense attorney, Hilton B. Dupree, it's kind of a fun name to say, he maintained that Michael acted on his own, that Jimmie was completely unaware of what he was planning, and that the only reason Michael was changing his story now was because he was a spurned lover out looking for revenge. Dupree even tried to paint Michael as a cold-blooded killer and claimed he participated in acts of vandalism that included the painting of satanic symbols when he was a teenager. Like, he was trying to find anything to paint Michael as, like, a really bad kid. Angela, remember, that's Jimmie's daughter, the one who had the crush on Michael in high school. She tearfully testified that her father, Terry, did indeed sexually abuse her 4 to 5 times a week between the ages of 9 and 14. And finally, when she was 14, she confided in her mother of what her father was doing. She said Jimmie confronted Terry about the abuse. He admitted it, and that was when he had moved out of the house and Jimmie had filed for divorce. And she said this was in the early part of 1985. And she said when her father moved back into the home, a month later, that's when he discovered the affair Jimmie and Michael were having. And that was when he again began to abuse Jimmie and the girls. She testified to his abuse in general and testified, quote, on many occasions he had a gun and he would hold it to me or himself. Jimmie's brother, Larry, remember the one who ran the construction business with Terry? He testified as well and said, quote, you could see bruise marks on them when he would smack him around. They tried to keep it quiet. He also reiterated what Jimmie Sue had said, that Terry had threatened to kill her and himself after he discovered her affair. And it seems like Angela and the rest of Jimmie's family just painted what an abusive prick Terry was. They said there was increased tension and escalation between Terry and Michael. They said Terry began to harass Michael and believed that Michael was out to kill him. I mean, like, he wasn't wrong. Angela, along with other family members, also disputed Michael's claim that Jimmie had given him $1,800 to hire a hitman. Anja contended that that $1,800, which, by the way, was a cash advance that Jimmie had taken out on her credit card, that wasn't to give to Michael to hire a hitman. No. It was to pay off a blackmailer who knew about Terry's abuse, and they threatened to blow the whistle on all of it and threatened to expose him to the police. I'm not sure why this would be a bad thing, but okay. Jimmie's defense brought forth so many family members that testified not just to Terry's abuse, but also that he was violently obsessed with his own, quote, guilt, along with the affair his wife was having. Yeah, he was just so tore up about it. Angela revealed that on Father's Day of 1985, Terry had tried to kill himself. And he did this by sitting in a closed garage with 2 vehicles running and swallowing some pills. He had refused to go to the church with his family that day, saying that, quote, he wasn't a worthy father. I mean, yeah, he doesn't seem like a worthy human being, but whatever. Jimmie took the stand in her own defense during her trial. She claimed that she ended the 3-month-long affair with Michael and ended it long ago in March of 1985. And this was after Terry had discovered it. She said once he discovered it, she ended the affair. She said, quote, I thought if anybody killed anybody, it would be Terry killing Michael. She claimed her and Terry were in bed that evening, and that was when the knock at the door disrupted their night. She did take blame for her husband's death, but not directly, of course. She said, quote, one man is dead, and another one's in prison for life. Because of my affair. She cried several times while on the stand and excused away those incriminating, damning jailhouse tapes with Michael, saying that she was just agreeing with whatever Michael was saying at the time because she felt sorry for him and she wanted to, quote, appease him. She said, quote, I didn't really know what he was talking about. I had just told him I don't remember. When he kept on, I just agreed. She said that she had mixed feelings about Michael and had only agreed to go to the prison to see him after Blanche had asked her to. Quote, I loved Michael and I felt responsible for where he was at because of my involvement with him, because of our affair. I felt a lot of guilt where he was concerned. You should. You molested a child. When the prosecution then asked Jimmie if she believed she had destroyed the Ketman family, she responded with, quote, I think the Ketmans have destroyed my family. Michael killed my husband. It is said Ralph, her husband, he did attend the trial, but he left during part of her testimony. And he had left the courtroom when those damning jailhouse tapes tapes had been played. Michael finally testified, all right? Michael himself testified, and in his testimony, he revealed Jimmie's role in planning everything. He talked about the failed hitman attempts, how towards the end of their relationship, Jimmie was withholding sex, was using it to blackmail him, calling him names and demeaning him. Quote, "I told her not to worry because Terry would soon be dead. She said he better be, or I'm not going to have sex anymore." And he said this was on the last day they had slept together, January 1st, 1986. And how did he know? Because he had kept a calendar. Remember, he kept a calendar of the times that they were intimate. He testified how she allowed him to take her gun, how she devised the plan for the friend to lure Terry out of the house. He admitted that he did cover for her in his own 1986 trial, but after finding out that she had remarried and coming to the realization that she had abandoned him and used and manipulated him, he decided to come forward. He said, quote, "I had been told by Jimmie Sue on multiple times that he was after me and out to kill me." The prosecution, I mentioned this briefly earlier, they did play those recorded tapes. David Gilreath, he also testified. Remember, his ex-wife worked at the salon, and he just testified to the times that he heard Jimmie Sue saying that she was looking for someone to, quote, bump off her husband. And on April 4th, after only 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found 38-year-old Jimmie Sue Gambrill guilty of conspiracy to commit the murder of her husband, Terry Finger. She was sentenced to the mandatory term of life in prison. She was sent to Atlanta's Metro State Prison for Women, and she did try to get in trial in May of 1989, but she was denied in September of that same year. She filed an appeal in October of that same year, but it was rejected the next year in May of 1990. In October of 1990, Ralph finally filed for divorce from Jimmie Sue. In April of 1992, a made-for-TV movie was made about this case. It was called Stay the Night. I read one source that said that this title, it came because it came from the fact that Stay the Night was one of the songs that Jimmie Sue and Michael really loved, and it meant a lot to them because, you know, Michael could never stay the night with Jimmie because she was married. And get this, you know who played Jimmie in this movie? Barbara Hershey. Yeah, she played Candy in that made-for-TV movie about the Candy Montgomery case, killing in a small town. Yeah, so Barbara Hershey played Candy Montgomery, and in this movie, she played Jimmie Sue Finger. Now, apparently this movie is told from the complete point of view of the Ketmans, and Blanche actually had a lot to do with the movie. Atlanta-based producer Jacqueline Colleen J.C. Shardo, she actually bought the rights and the story from the Ketmans, and served as an executive producer on the film. She spent a lot of time with the Ketmans, including Michael and Blanche. She spent time with Jimmie Sue. She said, quote, "Jimmie Sue wanted to talk to us. One thing that's important is what Jimmie Sue said to me, as did Blanche and Michael, that none of them holds any kind of ill will toward the other. It was the most amazing thing I had ever seen." What? No ill will? Jane Alexander, she played Blanche in the movie, and as such, she spent a lot of time with Blanche. You know, of course, wanting to get her character and stuff, but Barbara Hershey, she actually declined to meet with Jimmie Sue, though she did consult with Blanche and Michael. But it should be noted, Barbara Hershey also said that she didn't believe people were all good or all evil. And in her own research on finding out who Jimmie Sue was, Barbara Hershey said that she found, quote, "lots of very vulnerable and sweet, endearing qualities." Jane Alexander, again, she played Blanche, she said she did meet the real Jimmie Sue. And she did offer some insight into the friendship that developed between Jimmie and Blanche, because again, she spent a lot of time with Blanche, and she said, quote, "She did become very friendly with Jimmie Sue," referring to Blanche. "Blanche is an extremely compassionate woman, and she's always able to find the best in people. And Jimmie Sue was a very charismatic figure. She was a lot of fun, but Blanche also felt sorry for her. I think Blanche really felt her maternal instincts coming out with Jimmie Sue." Blanche has said that the movie Stay the Night is, quote, 99% correct, and she said that she entrusted the story to JC because she thought that she would tell the truth, and she wanted to bring to light that affairs between older women and adolescent boys, they shouldn't be winked at or laughed at or joked about or taken light. You know, they should be taken seriously. And yeah, that's just kind of how those kind of relationships are treated in our culture, right? It's sort of like a wink, wink, nod, nod, like nice, you know? And it's like, no, dude, it was predatory. Like, if you switch the genders on this, people would rightfully so be outraged and disgusted. Why is it okay because Jimmie's a woman and Michael was a boy, you know? Blanche said of watching the movie when it aired, quote, "I think it's going to be hard to watch it unfold on TV. It's going to bring it all back. But maybe it'll be good for me. It will help me put it in perspective." During the filming, Blanche said that she couldn't believe how, accurate and realistic Barbara Hershey was when she was doing Jimmy. Now, though Jimmie Sue did sit down with the producer-filmmaker J.C. Shardo, and she was interviewed, Jimmy claims that the movie was not correct at all, and again reiterated her innocence, which is really funny because that's how J.C. described Jimmie Sue. She said, quote, "Jimmie Sue is someone who believes whatever she's doing is right at any given moment, and I think she will go to her grave believing she's innocent." In a local TV news interview, it took place around the time that the movie aired, Jimmie Sue said that she had to completely change her way of thinking about everything, about her whole life after she was convicted. She said, quote, "No matter what is said, I know in my heart that I am innocent. I know I'm innocent." She said, quote, "Michael made a fool out of a lot of people, but, quote, I don't have any hatred for Michael. I think what I feel for Michael is more pity." And why does she feel more pity? Quote, "Because he's a much sicker man than I thought he was." And Jimmie Sue's feelings for Blanche? She said that she didn't blame Blanche at all for what she did, saying, quote, "I think she did what every mother would have done if she felt her child was in danger." Though again, she reiterated that phone conversation that took place between them, where she said "Oh honey, I'll put the nails in your son's coffin." Again, she reiterated that phone conversation never took place. JC said of the film, quote, "We went to great lengths to show both sides. Jimmie Sue to this day believes she's innocent and hopes one day to be able to get out of jail and prove it. We went to great lengths to see if we could find anybody who could give us information to support what she told us. But we couldn't." What a shock. On March 31st, 1993, when he was 25 years old, Michael Kettman Jr. was released from prison after serving 7 years behind bars. He had been described as a model prisoner while serving, and he was a member of the prison fire department. The prosecutor, remember Tom Sharon, he didn't object at all because he knew how integral Michael was to convicting Jimmy, who everyone in the prosecutor's office believed was the main instigator. In fact, when he was released, Michael had only become eligible for his first parole hearing February 23rd of that year. And apparently it is very, very rare for someone to get out on their first parole hearing. In 1992, so the year before he was released, only 35 out of 1,047 lifers had received parole on their first hearing. I don't know if this was on a state level or a federal level. I'm gonna guess a state level. He beat the odds, man. He got out on his first parole hearing. He went on to live a life. I know he went on to get married and have a child, though I believe the marriage ended in divorce. I read a source that said that he is currently a systems manager at North Georgia Trust Systems in Cartersville, Georgia. And on January 24th, 2005, Blanche, who did so much to get her son free, passed away at the age of 65 from lung cancer. And in the same year that Blanche died, 2005, 54-year-old Jimmy did yet another interview. At that point, she was the Atlanta's Metro State Prison for Women's longest-serving inmate, serving 16 years there. She proclaimed that she had received an unfair sentence. She was still proclaiming this, still maintaining her innocence. She said, quote, "I had a very abusive husband, but he was sexually molesting our children, and when I went to the police, they wouldn't do nothing. So I did." She said that she believed that she had served her time, and she had served enough of it, saying, quote, "I'll never quit paying for it. I'll always have to pay. But as that time issue, I have done my time." In prison, it seems that Jimmie Sue kind of took on a motherly role for a lot of inmates, where she kind of helped a bunch of younger inmates kind of through their stints in prison. I saw multiple posts and comments of women who said that they served time with Jimmy, and yeah, they all described her as just being like a protective mother figure who really took them under her wing, and if it wasn't for her, they wouldn't have survived their time in prison. They truly believe that, guilty or innocent, Jimmie Sue was a changed person. They said she looked forward to visits from her children and grandchildren and just had a warm heart. And on September 2nd, 2011, at the age of 61 years old, Jimmie Sue Finger Gambrill finally passed away. She died behind bars at Pulaski State Prison. Now, some sources said that she died from natural causes, while others said it was from complications from heart surgery. I found an article from 2015, and it was critical of the prison conditions of the prison that Jimmie Sue ultimately died at. It was saying that, yeah, the conditions were pretty bad. Medical needs were neglected and inmates were not well cared for. It is said that Jimmie complained of high fever and dehydration months after being transferred to Pulaski, but she was ignored. And this was despite the fact that she had just undergone heart surgery not long before. And I guess she also had several strokes on top of that. It is said that an inmate actually located a wheelchair for her just to sit down. Like, they didn't even provide her with a wheelchair. And this inmate was the one who took her to the infirmary. And here they determined that she needed yet another heart surgery. Now, according to this article, Jimmie died while undergoing the second heart surgery. Her official cause of death, according to prison records, was listed as heart infection. She had been scheduled for a parole hearing in 2013. There was an outpour of support and sadness at her death, primarily from those who had served time with Jimmie and her children, who had always stood by her. Family always stood by her. And then, of course, there were comments debating the accuracy of Stay the Night, with, of course, Jimmie's supporters saying that it wasn't accurate at all, while those who supported Michael and Blanche were saying, no, it was totally accurate. And yeah, that was the crazy, twisted, sordid tale of Jimmie Sue Finger. Yeah, hired her teenage lover to kill her husband. And man, so many thoughts. So yeah, first of all, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think Jimmie Sue absolutely manipulated and orchestrated this whole thing. Michael was a kid, and I'm sorry, especially a kid having his first sexual experience, his first relationship and physical, intimate relationship on a physical and emotional level. Absolutely, dude. She was a 34-year-old woman. She knew damn well what she was doing. Now, sounds like Terry Finger was a big POS, and frankly, seems like the world's a better place with him gone. But, girl, you don't manipulate some 17-year-old kid into doing that. You know what I mean? And honestly, I think she was just greedy and selfish and lazy. I don't think she wanted to go through the hassle of divorce. I don't understand how Terry could have made her life a living hell if she had all the support, who acknowledged that he abused his family, sexually molested their children. I don't get it. So kind of just makes me think that she was just lazy and greedy and didn't want to lose her business, didn't want to lose the house. And yeah, a divorce was just too messy. That's just kind of how I feel, just based on what I researched. Again, I wish I could have found more information on Jimmie Sue's upbringing and childhood, what led her to be like this. I mean, if she's 34 years old and already has a child in high school, I think Angela was 15, 16, something like that, she must have married and had children very young. So I don't know, maybe that's why she was so immature and just dumb. I don't know. Tell me what you think. What do you think about this case? Yeah, it's just wild. I would love to see that Stay the Night movie. I think that would be an interesting watch. And yeah, Blanche is really what blows my mind in this case. Would you be able to do that? I don't know if I'd be able to play the long game like that. I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm that strong or that clever. I don't know. But yeah, tell me what you guys think about this case. Isn't it wild? Thank you again, Heather, for sending me down another rabbit hole. Again, sorry that I don't have that nitty gritty details that I love to get. But yeah, I don't know how there hasn't been a book written about this. I don't know why Blanche wouldn't sit down with an author and make a book off this as well. But yeah, maybe the movie was enough and they're like, you know what? We just want to live our lives. So yeah, I don't know. Please tell me what you guys think about this case. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. My neighbors are driving me nuts. I really, really hope I can at least do a passive job of fixing the audio. Yeah, these idiots are they're so rude. They party and have straight up bands and karaoke and concerts right in their front yard. Which is it's fine, but it's just dude, really? Come on. All right, well, that will do it for Crime Dive this week. Next week, doing another requested case that y'all gave me. And this one, oh my god, this one took me way longer than I thought it was, because it was hard to find information at first, but then when I started digging, oh boy, I found quite a bit. So yeah, next week, the last case for September will definitely be an interesting one. Alrighty guys, until I see you next week, stay safe, take care out there. Remember, just don't be a douche, alright? Don't be a dick when you're going out, alright? Especially when you're dealing with customer service people. Dear God, dude, they don't get paid enough. Don't be a dick, alright? Alrighty, y'all. Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and leave it there. Bye-bye.